George Diggs is a professor of biology at Austin College. I first became aware of his work when he was presenting at the Ancestral Health Symposium. One of his research areas is the mismatch between our current nutritional environment and the human evolutionary environment, but he also studies botany, as well as the biology in extreme environments. He's traveled extensively, including to the Arctic and the Antarctic. And today he's going to talk about plant defense chemicals.
Thank you. Well, it's a real pleasure being here this morning. And the topic of my presentation is plant chemical defenses, the dark side of food plants. And it'll tie in a bit with some of the things you've just been hearing. So I think it's pretty intuitive. Animals defend themselves in a very different way than plants. But plants have a very complex array of defense strategies. One is very obvious, physical defense. The one I'm going to focus on is chemical, but there are a variety of others as well. So most people don't realize how toxic many people are. This is a book published a few years ago by a botanist and a veterinarian, and looking at the toxic plants of North America, and there are literally hundreds of toxic plants native to North America. And it's well known in animals because you can do testing and they can derive the LD50s. How much does it take to actually kill, a fatal dose for many toxic plants? Just to give you an idea of some of the effects on animals, these are some of the symptoms caused in Texas by plants, and from some books I worked on: blind, staggers, locoism, slobbers. I don't know about y'all, but I don't want any of those. And there are a variety of different chemical defense mechanisms. You can break these up in various ways, and some people can group the categories, but I'm going to talk about 3 today: toxins, things that I consider those defenses that damage the eater, and then digestibility reducers. They make the food eaten indigestible, not worth eating, and then hormone disruptors or endocrine disruptors, things like estrogen mimics, and there are many, many others. So toxins. These things interfere with the herbivore's metabolism or structure in some way, and there are lots of different effects. They can affect the nervous system, they can stop respiration, they can damage the gut lining, they can damage the liver, they can damage the kidneys. You choose what symptom, and you can almost surely find a toxic plant that will do that to an animal. Just to give you one example of one of the extreme ones, this is one that's native widely across the U.S. It's native right a few yards probably from my door. Water hemlock or cowbane is one of the most poisonous plants in North America. It disrupts the central nervous system, results in seizures, coma, and death. So it's a pretty bad plant. And this is a little thing from my book. Virulently poisonous, a single bite is reported to be sufficient to kill a human. Children have even been poisoned by whistles made from the stems. And this resembles, it's in the carrot family, it resembles parsley. And there's some other things like poison hemlock. Some of these are so toxic that just walking through a colony of these with bare skin and getting it on your skin can cause a reaction. So some plants are really, really toxic. Now, shifting over to food things, all of us have probably in the past when we were growing up had nutmeg at something at Christmas or in some kind of thing. You might not realize nutmeg is actually a potent hallucinogen in the proper dose. You're not going to get it from cookies or hot chocolate, but it has been used as a hallucinogen. Apparently it's a real bad trip. The point is the dose makes the poison for many of these things. Even more common, grapefruit. We now know that there are grapefruit interactions with 80 or more prescription drugs. And the particular toxin in this case, they're called furanocoumarins. And the liver breaks down these toxins, but the liver enzyme system that is involved in detoxification, these are cytochrome P450 enzymes, unfortunately, the grapefruit toxins compete for liver enzymes that would normally be breaking down prescription drugs. And so this can cause a problem. And in fact, sometimes at a pharmacy, they'll even put a warning label on certain drugs. It's not done consistently. It should be, obviously. But sometimes there's even a warning label not to take grapefruit if you're taking a certain medication, because that can cause problems. Now, I want to mention two concepts that I think will kind of continue throughout many of the things I say. One is bioindividuality, and the other is biosimilarity. Most of you are, I'm sure, familiar with bioindividuality. We're all unique, and this can be based on our genetics, might be something about our detoxability, for example, and epigenetics, which of our genes have been turned on and off. This may go all the way back to our fetal development, our gut microbiome, and our gut barrier function, as you've heard in two of the previous talks, our age, our exposure to toxins, and just differences in our immune systems. So it shouldn't be surprising that people are affected very differently by the same foods, and some people are exquisitely sensitive to plants. Michaela is probably a very good example of this. She's very sensitive to plants. Other people may be less so. But it shouldn't be surprising given what we know about bioindividuality. Another concept you're probably not familiar with, at least with the name, is what I like to call biosimilarity. At the cellular level, we are remarkably similar to insects and other animals, fungi, and a host of other things at the actual cellular level. And so, because of that, it shouldn't be surprising that defense chemicals that evolved to protect against one kind of pathogen or herbivore might also affect us. In fact, most of the toxic chemicals in plants evolved as defenses against other things, not against us. But they damage us because we're so similar at the cellular level. Now, I'm going to go through a few specific plant defense chemicals, categories of defense chemicals. Obviously, there are so many more we can't cover, but just a few that I think are probably important. One set are the digestive enzyme inhibitors. For example, plants make many protease inhibitors, and protease inhibitors prevent the breakdown of protein. They inhibit the enzymes. And in this case, the eater, the herbivore, whatever is eating the plant, can't get nutrition from the plant material that it's eating. So a particular example of this would be the soybean protease inhibitor. It has negative effects on the digestion of many insects, including beetles and tobacco hornworm and corn earworm, and it also affects lab animals. And then you have to ask, okay, how about humans? And how about the dosage? This is something that I would be concerned, if somebody was a vegetarian or vegan and was attempting to get much of their protein from soybeans, for example. Another is wheat protease inhibitors. And these have been shown to trigger a strong innate immune response in cells from both celiac and non-celiac human patients. As you heard in the last talk, gluten affects both celiac and non-celiac patients, and it's not surprising that wheat protease inhibitors do the same thing. So these fuel inflammation, and I would just ask, are these contributing to non-celiac gluten sensitivity? It could be making it seem worse. And so this is a paper, for example, from a few years ago. Let's see if I can make it go backwards. Yeah, there we go. Wheat amylase trypsin inhibitors drive intestinal inflammation via activation of toll-like receptor 4. So we know they drive intestinal inflammation, and there's even a good molecular mechanism now. Now, this is totally different from gluten. This is a whole other compound. Gluten, as you've heard, can cause some very serious problems. We're all familiar with it. I'm sure everybody in this room is familiar with the problems with gluten. I'm not going to focus on gluten at all because there are other things I think are more worthwhile talking about today. So how about other toxins that damage the gut? And as you heard Paul talk about, lectins are a type of defense protein that binds to sugars. And I want to put it in an evolutionary context. What did they evolve to do? They're very ancient molecules. They've been around long before there were, they've been around long before there were primates, long before there were mammals. Did plants evolve them to defend against mammals? I would say probably not. They're probably evolved originally as protection from pathogens, fungi and bacteria and insects and other things like this. But because of biosimilarity, they affect us. Now, again, tying in with our previous talk, 5 raw red kidney beans make a person quite sick. And when people say we need to prepare beans properly, well, as you know, the preparation methods may not get rid of all the lectins. They may reduce the amount. But lectins are especially high in beans and grains. Some have lectins that are especially problematic. Peanuts are an example. Wheat is an obvious example. And if we look at wheat germ agglutinin, we've known for more than 40 years that this is a potent anti-fungicide. It affects wheat rust, for instance. And it inhibits fungi, and it also binds to bacterial cell walls, so probably defends against bacteria as well. So we know this is involved in pathogen defense. This is so potent against insects that biotech companies have genetically engineered crop plants to express wheat germ agglutinin. This is kind of disturbing. Let's say that somebody did not have any sensitivity to a plant, and you splice wheat germ agglutinin into it, then you might have sensitivity to the plant in which it was spliced if the plant is actually expressing wheat germ agglutinin. So it might be great for the farmer, but not so good for the human eating that plant that didn't realize what had been spliced into it. So this is just a paper from 2012, genetic manipulation of tomato using wheat germ agglutinin through, and they used a bacterial cell to move it into the tomato. Disturbing if that became widespread. We also know, as you've heard, that wheat germ agglutinin can actually get into the whole body or systemic circulation, and it can then damage parts of the body remote from the gut. Paper, and we've known about this again for many, many years. This paper dates back to 1993. And we know that wheat germ agglutinin affects human gut epithelial cells, contributing to leaky gut. And we've known about this. This is a paper from 10 years ago talking about this. So wheat germ agglutinin is a problematic substance. And we know it drives inflammation in humans. The dietary intake of wheat and other sugar grains and their role in inflammation, paper from 2013. Now, wheat germ agglutinin is sensitive to temperature. And so you might think, well, cooking will remove this, reduce it. Well, we know that we can reduce the amount of lectins by processing, but how about cereals and other processed foods? How well are they treated? How about uncooked or poorly cooked wheat products? Many of us as kids probably ate cookie dough. How about wheat germ? Health food people often just add wheat germ, uncooked wheat germ, to their foods. How much wheat germ agglutinin are they getting? And what is that causing? Which is very ironic since they're doing that presumably for health reasons. So some people may be getting quite a bit of wheat germ agglutinin in these ways. So, ironically, wheat germ agglutinin damage to humans is probably a quirk of our evolutionary history, of our shared cellular biology with organisms like fungi and insects. These plants didn't evolve this to get us. Now, there's another category of toxins. I had some this morning, caffeine. Caffeine is an alkaloid. There's an alkaloid in chocolate called theobromine. And chemically, these are referred to as xanthines. Okay? And it turns out that we're able to metabolize xanthines with one of our liver enzymes, one of our P450s. But dogs can't detoxify these very well. Now, you might be wondering why I'm talking about dogs, but I'll link back in. So you've all heard that you can poison a dog with chocolate. You can poison them with coffee, too, but dogs aren't likely to drink coffee because it's bitter. But the sweetness of chocolate entices them. So if you think this isn't poisonous, this is a paper from the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry, evaluation of cocoa and coffee-derived methylxanthines as toxicants for the control of pest coyotes. They're testing this stuff to use as coyote poisons. Okay? I mean, that's how toxic these things are to canines. Fatal dose is in the range of 100 to 250 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. That's literally death by chocolate. And to put this into a form that's a little more understandable, I went into the veterinary medical literature. Oh, by the way, symptoms: vomiting, staggering, agitation, seizures, and in some cases death because it can affect the central nervous system. You can go into the veterinary medical literature, though, and look, and if you do the calculations, you can find out that an 18-pound dog, so not a big dog, but not a little dog either, can be poisoned by consuming 2 ounces of dark baking chocolate. So 2 ounces is not a lot of chocolate. So that can be a fatal dose for a dog. Now, it'd take a lot of milk chocolate to kill a dog, but not dark chocolate. Now, here's why I mentioned the dog. Different species of animals have slightly different liver P450 enzymes. And so there are many things that other animals can eat that we can't, and vice versa. But people also have genetic differences in their liver detox capability. And in fact, there's a 40-fold variation in people's abilities to detoxify caffeine. So it's not surprising that some people are much more affected by caffeine than others. Different tolerances. Another type of toxin are some things referred to as oxalates. And a scientist named Sally Norton is doing a lot of research on this right now. She spoke at Ancestral Health a couple of years ago. You can find her lecture online about oxalates. It's very interesting. But this would include oxalic acid and its salts and crystals. And maybe you've heard of calcium oxalate. That's the most abundant insoluble mineral found in plants. It's very, very common in lots and lots of plants. And in plants, it's present in both a crystalline form and an ionic form. Now, in humans, when we eat these things, the crystals can actually cause physical damage to our body, to various parts of the body. The ionic form, though, will bioaccumulate and will build up in certain tissues. And it can do a variety of things. It can reduce mineral absorption, but it accumulates in organs, including the kidneys. And some of you have probably had calcium oxalate kidney stones in the past. I had those. And that can be a very unpleasant experience. Now, there are some plant families that have a lot of oxalates. And I'm going to talk just briefly about this family to give you an idea of how much oxalate can be in certain plants. Now, you've probably all seen this plant. It's called dumb cane or Dieffenbachia. It's a very common houseplant. This is probably one of the 2 or 3 most common houseplants in the country. It's called philodendron. And these are both in a certain plant family called the arum family or the Araceae. It's a very well-known plant family, particularly common in the tropics. Now, dumb cane and many members of the arum family have what are called raphids. These raphids are needle-like crystals of calcium oxalate. And when I say needle-like, indeed, they are shaped like needles. And these can cause severe tissue damage. You don't even have to ingest them. If you do, this can be quite problematic. The name dumb cane is derived from its ability to cause speech to become slurred and unintelligible and even to paralyze the vocal cords. And so the person is rendered unable to speak. I mean, this can be, and this was actually used as a torture mechanism at one time in the past. The sap of others, the sap of some members of the arum family have so many of these crystals that just working with the plant and getting that sap on your hands can cause severe irritation, make the hand swell. One of my botanical colleagues was on an expedition in Central America and found what he thought was a new species of this family, collected a bunch, made herbarium specimens, and he had a horrible reaction to his hands from the oxalate crystals penetrating his cell membranes on the surface of his hands. Wouldn't want to eat that. Now, oxalates are in many food plants. There have been cases of, they're rare, but fatal poisoning from overconsumption of rhubarb and starfruit and sorrel. And high oxalate foods, such as spinach, spinach is it's kind of the poster child of this, contributes to kidney stones and accumulation in other organs like the thyroid. Also, consumption of a diet that's overall high in oxalates, so if you have a diet that has lots of spinach, lots of beets, lots of nuts, chocolate, and a number of other things, can be very problematic for some people. We apparently vary a great deal in our ability to deal with oxalates, and this goes back to this idea of bioindividuality. What will hurt one person may not have nearly as bad an effect on someone else. So different people have varying genetic abilities to deal with oxalates, and this varies with age, environmental conditions, the gut microbiome, a number of other things. So it's kind of ironic. Some humans may be very sensitive to lectins, some may be very sensitive to oxalates, some may be very sensitive to something else. Problem is, we don't know what we individually are sensitive to. Give you kind of this is from last year, the American Journal of Kidney Disease, a green smoothie cleanse causing acute oxalate nephropathy. Okay, so that's acute kidney injury with the potential to progress to end-stage renal disease. This is a pretty serious thing. This was a this case study was a 65-year-old woman who had consumed these, green smoothies, thinking it was going to help her, and it caused severe problems. Now, the final category of defense chemicals that I'll mention are hormone mimics or hormone disruptors, endocrine disruptors, and these are things that mimic the hormones of herbivores. And these are also known from many, many plants. To give you an insect example to show you how powerful these things are. There's a type of plant hormone called phytoecdysones, and they affect metamorphosis in insects. And this is a pupae with 3 heads. Now, obviously, that's problematic for that creature. This is a fall armyworm, and it had eaten a member of the mint family that has these phytoecdysones. And so it totally threw off its developmental pathway. Now, we don't see deviations in development like this in humans, but nonetheless, some of these plant hormone mimics we think are problematic. We've known for many, many decades, since the 1940s, that one of these hormone mimics in plants called isoflavones, and these are in some members of the bean family, they cause serious reproductive problems in sheep, including sterility. And there are problems known from many other animals. Soybeans contain isoflavones, some of these hormone mimics. And turns out these probably, again, had nothing to do with us, probably nothing to do even with mammals, but they're excellent fungicides. They are able to provide protection against a particular group of fungi called the rust. There are fungi called rust and smuts. And so these provide protection against rust. And we can see if you infect a soybean plant, for instance, as you note over here, if you infect it with a rust, it will then upregulate its production of these plant defense chemicals. So you can measure before infection and after infection, and the soybean plant will make more, which makes perfect sense if you're thinking about a defense chemical. So how about consumption of large amounts of soy products in the human diet? Well, I want us to think about a couple of things. There are people, probably no one in this room, who would recommend soy for menopausal women. Here's a book that from a few years ago by a physician, The Estrogen Alternative, the Soy Solution for Menopause. You can go into any health food store and you can find soy supplements, presumably to help women whose estrogen levels are falling to mitigate some of the symptoms. So let's think about this for a minute. You have physicians recommending this, at least some. Why would you do this? Baby formula. So here we have babies at the time of their life when they're very sensitive to hormonal signaling. How many times a day would a baby be fed soy formula? 6, 8? I don't know exactly, depending, probably a couple hours between each feeding. Be the only food they're getting, day after day after day. Why do this is what I would say. It doesn't seem to make sense to me. We know from research in humans that soy causes a reduction in sperm quality in men and causes changes in sex hormone ratios. We know that these things can have some effects even in adult humans. Now, how bad are these effects? I don't know. I personally choose not to eat soy. But there have been some review studies of both human and animal models, and the research raises real concern about children. So I would just say, why do it? We know that from research about 10 years ago that the urine levels of these isoflavones are 500 times higher in infants fed soy formula. Now, are they harming the children? Well, I don't know. How sensitive is an individual child? When we think about bioindividuality, everybody's different. Based on genetics, based on gut barrier function, based on microbiome, what percentage of children that are getting these formulas may be injured? There are obviously kids that are lactose intolerant. But I would say there have to be better alternatives than to feed a child a compound that is known to contain, by the way, not just these chemicals, but also, as you remember from the very beginning of my talk, you have soybean protease inhibitors, and there are also compounds in soy that can affect the thyroid. They're called goitrogens. So soybean literally kind of hits the jackpot on a number of different kinds of toxins, all in one little package. So I would summarize then by saying the problems caused by the consumption of some plants, particularly in large doses, is not surprising in the evolutionary context. Plants evolved to fight back. And we did not evolve to eat huge quantities of any particular plant, as we're doing in the modern world. Some people get a very large percentage of their calories from, it might be soy, it might be wheat. When you focus in on one group, that would then be a recipe for disaster. So I would leave you with this: beware what you eat. Plants are not necessarily your friends.